John couldn't have been happier with how his life had turned out. He'd married his high school sweetheart Emily right after college, and they'd been inseparable ever since. The big milestones like buying their first home together in the suburbs and getting new jobs they loved had only brought them closer. John still got butterflies, sometimes just looking over at Emily's smiling face when they were out to dinner or watching a movie together on the couch. Their careers had worked out perfectly too. John loved teaching English literature to the high school students. He got a kick out of introducing them to classic novels and watching the light bulbs go on as they discovered great writing for the first time. And Emily's little baking business was finally taking off after years of hard work. Her custom cakes and pastries for weddings and parties were becoming the talk of the town. At night, you could usually find them curled up together reading or watching their favorite shows. Emily would lean her head on John's shoulder, and he'd absent-mindedly play with her long brown hair while they relaxed. They'd worked so hard to get here, building this warm, loving home together. To John, Emily was his world, his partner, his lover, and his best friend. He couldn't imagine life without her by his side. They were just two small-town kids who'd made it, following their dreams into a future full of happiness. That perfect life came crashing down around John's ears one day in the worst way possible. He'd stopped by Emily's bakery after school to pick her up for a date night, like they tried to have every Friday. But when he walked in, Emily wasn't there. Her assistant said she'd gone out for a meeting hours ago and hadn't returned any of her texts. An awful pit grew in John's stomach as he numbly walked out to the car and started driving aimlessly around town. Emily never went to meetings unless it was with a potential new client. But this didn't seem right. He racked his brain trying to think if she had mentioned anything, but came up blank. Then John's hands started shaking on the steering wheel when he looked in the rearview mirror. There was Emily's little Honda Civic parked outside a hoity-toity restaurant downtown. The kind of place they could never afford to go, all white tablecloths and ballet parking attendants. And getting out onto the sidewalk, laughing familiarly with some slick-looking guy in a $1,000 suit, was Emily herself. She leaned in to hug him, letting him pull her close. Too close for John's liking. Who the hell was this schmuck in the fancy suit? And more importantly, what the hell was his wife doing with him? John spent the entire miserable weekend holed up alone, blinds drawn, trying to process what he'd seen. He swung wildly between shock, anger, and crushing sadness. The Emily he knew and loved, his sweet, goofy, down-to-earth wife, would never cheat on him. But the evidence was right there. Memories he'd once cherished now rushed back with a bitter taste. Like the nights Emily had to work late at the bakery, or the times she'd somehow already made plans when he wanted a casual date night. Little lies and deceptions he'd overlooked at the time now carried a sickening new meaning. How long had this been going on? Who even was this guy she was sneaking around with? By Sunday night, John's chest ached from the continuous lump in his throat. The bright future he thought they had sketched out so clearly was crumbling. He pictured Emily's pretty face and felt his heart being slowly hollowed out. He'd thought she was his person, forever and always, come what may. But now John didn't know her at all. Whoever this woman carrying on with some wealthy SNOB she barely knew was, it wasn't the Emily he'd married. His Emily was dead to him. All that remained were questions without answers and a cold, empty space in his heart. The logical next step was divorce, John knew. Cut her off, get rid of her, move on. But even entertaining that idea caused a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. They'd been together over half their lives. How could it be that simple to just throw it all away? Part of him still couldn't comprehend it was really happening. But then the rage would rise up again, burning away any residual hesitation. The disrespect, the deception, the thought of Emily being physically intimate with another man while still married to him made John want to puke. She'd made a ruinous mockery of everything they'd built together, everything he'd thought they stood for. Who the hell did she think she was? Maybe divorce wasn't enough. Maybe Emily needed to be taught a lesson. To have the scales removed from her eyes so she could see what a fantastic man she'd so carelessly tossed aside. Maybe this scumbag boyfriend of hers needed to be taken down a peg too while they were at it. Yeah, the more John thought about it, the more getting some real honest-to-God revenge started sounding pretty damn appealing. They wanted to play demented games, OV play along, and beat them at their own twisted game. No more Mr. Nice Guy, not after this gut punch of a betrayal. It was time to make them pay. John had been so preoccupied with the betrayal tornado ripping apart his life that he'd almost forgotten about having to finally clean out his grandfather's attic. The old man had been a pack rat supreme, and ever since he passed last year, that musty attic was just collecting more dust and junk. John figured he might as well get it over with one weekend and clear the whole space out. It was tedious, mindless work, pulling down boxes of fusty old books, random tools, you name it. John was drenched in sweat and coughing up dust when something caught his eye, an ancient tin-bound chest shoved way back in the corner. He dragged it out from the shadows and saw a faded label on the side, Pap's Stamp Collection. Well, this ought to be good for a laugh, John thought, prying off the lid. But once he brushed off the decades' worth of grime, his jaw dropped. Shining up at him were rows and rows of mint-condition stamps, and not like the boring flag kind either. Weird boutique stamps, ones with centaurs and lightning bolts. John didn't know jack about stamp collecting, but even he knew his thrifty grandfather wouldn't have sprung for some ultra-rare, clearly expensive collection like this just for kicks, right? On a hunch, he snapped some pics and sent them to his buddy who worked at a memorabilia shop. The response near made John's eyes pop out. You hit the mother lode, dude. That's easily 6 figures worth if it's all legit. John knew he had to play this exactly right. He couldn't just whip out a secret multi-million-dollar stamp collection. Emily would be on that faster than flies on you-know-what, trying to claim it was marital property. No, this had to be done on the ultra-down-low until the divorce was final. Through some hushed calls and internet sleuthing, John found himself linked up with big-name auction house in New York that specialized in rare stamp sales. They seemed legit enough and didn't ask too many questions about his anonymous collector story. Within a couple weeks, glossy pics of the full collection had been taken, and the items were being dramatic whispers all over the stamp collecting world. John could scarcely believe his eyes when the final numbers came in. Over $2 million. For real, all those times Grandpa's stupid hobby used to make him roll his eyes. Now he was richer than half the jerks who used to make fun of it. The gargantuan money transfer into his account actually triggered a fraud alert from the bank. John had to go through a zillion security hoops to prove it was on the level. Man, did that sting Emily's money-grubbing boyfriend where it hurt. Some no-name teacher from the sticks pulling in millions like it was nothing. With over 2 million clams burning a hole in his checking account, John knew he needed some professional-grade money management and fast. He may have just stumbled into ridiculous fortune, but he wasn't an idiot. Dude had read enough stories about lotto winners blowing it all to not take this seriously. Plus, there was still the matter of separating his assets from Emily's gouging talons before the divorce sharks started circling. That's when John's stamp dealer friend mentioned this fascinating woman named Vivienne LeClaire. Rumor was she came from silly money herself, born to some revered art collecting family in Europe. But Vivienne hadn't just sat on her laurels. She'd gotten her MBA, then built her own investment company from the ground up, specializing in managing collections and assets for the aggressively wealthy. More importantly, she knew all the tricks for hiding that wealth from greedy exes and taxmen. Figuring it couldn't hurt to meet her, John gave Vivienne a call. Before he knew it, he was being whisked away to her sprawling estate in the Hamptons for a discreet consultation. This Vivienne chick was, wow, early 40s but a total smoke show with eyes that could melt steel. More importantly, she clearly knew her stuff. educating John on setting up offshore accounts, exploring loopholes to protect his assets, you name it. She didn't bat an eye at the stamp windfall story either. These happy accidents happen more than you'd think, Vivienne purred with a sly grin. Let's just say I've made it my life's expertise to help secure that happiness. Over the next few months, John found himself being ushered into a world he'd never known existed. Art galleries, high-end auctions, underground banks, all these lavish realms of the obscenely wealthy that had been closed off to him before. With Vivienne as his mentor and guide, he got personal tours and introductions that made him feel like an A-lister. Vivienne seemed to get a kick out of watching the wide-eyed rookie reaction every time she pulled back another velvet curtain. The pieces themselves are just canvases and paints, Sherry, she'd purr in that accented voice. It's the sport, the gamesmanship, the gladiatorial thrill of the bid that makes this world go round. She taught him all the subtle power plays, how to sniff out a seller's motivation, the private special viewings and under-the-table perks available to those with means. And oh, did John ever have means now? He started making calculated, Vivienne-approved purchases at auctions just to get a feel for it at first. But soon, his triumphs over deep-pocketed rivals brought him a strange sort of satisfaction. Like he could breathe rarefied air and stand eye to eye with those smarmy jerks who used to look down their noses at him. All thanks to Vivienne's intoxicating tutelage. He still wasn't sure what game she was playing, getting her perfectly manicured claws into the new kid on the block like this. But John had to admit he was hooked on finding out. Through her web of connections, Vivienne got the skinny on Richard Cardington, the sleazeball businessman who'd stolen John's wife. Big surprise, the pretentious jerk was a prolific art collector, acquiring expensive pieces the same way he did everything, by throwing around his fat stacks of cash until he got his way. Vivienne smirked as she described his tactics of bullying, downright bribery, and underhanded ploys to outmaneuver rivals on the pieces. He simply had to get his grubby mitts on. Well, this time Cardington had set his sights on the ultimate objet d'art, a 16th century Venetian painting of a raven-haired lady, shrouded in mystery and rumored to be haunted. Or so the stories went. All John knew was that this decrepit old canvas was expected to fetch 9 figures, and Cardington was determined to be the proud owner, cost be damned. The smug prick had been vocal about making sure his acquisition would be the crown jewel of his nouveau riche collection, which is why the look of incredulous outrage on Richard's beet-red face at the auction house was worth every penny of the ludicrous winning bid John had thrown down at Vivienne's urging. The bidding war escalated to dizzying heights as John, calmly sipping a scotch, kept bobbing his paddle higher and higher like he had money infinity. When the hammer struck and the murmuring crowd turned to see the inconspicuous winner, you could actually pinpoint the second Cardington's aorta began quivering. John lifted his glass to the sputtering blowhard with a mock salute. He'd not only bested the blowhard at his own game, but now Cardington was out a truly obscene amount that would sting hard. First step of the revenge accomplished. With Vivienne's expert legal team working behind the scenes, John started getting detailed financials on just how much of their marital assets that ungrateful wretch Emily had been hemorrhaging to fund her illicit trysts with Richie Rich. Turns out, it was a lot. John nearly spit out his bourbon when the invoices for disgustingly opulent hotel suite stays, zillion-dollar shopping sprees, even a damn private jet rental came across his desk. The unmitigated gall of it all. "She's bled you dry, mon chou," Vivienne tesked, stubbing out her cigarette. "Luckily, I have ways of making it appear those expenditures were separate matters. Shall we restore what's rightfully yours before she flees the marriage bed entirely?" That sly smirk never left the French vixen's full red lips as she worked her magic, methodically reversing Emily's sketchy transactions through a dizzying array of offshores, numbered accounts, and equitable divorcement loopholes. By the time the papers were signed and the lawyers had made their engorgements, Emily was left with not much more than the overpriced La Perla lingerie on her back. The house, the businesses, every investment and bank account, it all got siphoned away while the redacted clueless cheater was too busy blowing John's hard-earned money on Richie's latest plaything yacht or whatever. As the ex-Mrs. John McGillicuddy, she was now officially just a broke divorcee whose ugly betrayal earned her nothing. No more living large off John's kindness and providership. Tough titties. At first, John viewed Vivienne as simply the supremely talented architect of his revenge. A stunningly gorgeous one, sure, but he tried not to read into her flirtatious mannerisms too much. Vivienne was a born hustler, and women like that probably batted their bedroom eyes at every mook they needed to wrap around their French-tipped finger. But as the months grinding through the divorce turned into years, and Vivienne remained an invaluable, steadfast presence by John's side, he started rethinking that assumption. Her wry smirks and casual touches lingered in his mind more often than made sense. He caught himself looking forward to their meetings, a warmth spreading through his chest whenever she arrived in a waft of expensive perfume. Behind those seductive eyes and closed-off airs, John sensed real tenderness, even vulnerability. Like maybe Miss Moneybags wasn't just buttering him up for the next score after all. And John certainly didn't imagine the heat in Vivienne's gaze whenever he outwitted another wealthy blue blood in the art world, or stuck it to some unscrupulous shark trying to take his millions. "Determination looks sumptuous on you, darling," she outright purred one evening, trailing a delicate finger along his jawline. Vivienne didn't just crave success. She craved the burningly intense focus and refuses to lose attitude John applied to regaining his sense of self-worth. Perhaps that was her biggest turn-on of all, a man who refused to let life's gut punches keep him down for the count. A true kindred spirit. It happened one night after they'd tag-teamed some bigwig collector into selling them a rare Monet for pennies on the dollar. They were back at Vivienne's Hamptons Palace, giddily rehashing all the juicy details over glasses of Chateau Petrus that probably cost more than John's first car. Somehow, as the banter and laughter flowed more freely than the wine, he and Vivienne realized they were sitting unnecessarily close together on that curved sofa. When had her hand landed on his knee, why did the firelight make her emerald eyes seem to smolder so enticingly? Then they were kissing, desperately, hungrily, like two people who'd been wandering life's deserts forever before finding an oasis of kindred, intoxicating connection. Her lithe fingers clutched at the lapels of his suit jacket as John drank in her luxurious floral scent. All the times they'd bonded over being bamboozled by the same silver-tongued snakes, nursing one another's emotional wounds in those stolen tender moments between turbulent battles. It all came bursting forth in a tangled, impassioned fusion of bodies and souls. As he raised his swan-like new lover into his arms and carried her towards the bedroom, John realized something profound. This finally was his fresh start. Not just rebounding from Emily's nuclear-level betrayal, but an opportunity to leave that entire life behind and forge a bold new identity. One of power, status, and not having to take gruff from trust fund pricks who turned up their nose at him on principle. With Vivienne as his partner, his battle-tested mainly his emerald-eyed Cleopatra, John could well and truly become nouveau riche. When John looked back on that fateful night outside the restaurant, it still made his blood boil like an aneurysm gripped his heart. The utter disrespect, the callous deception, the way Emily had so thoroughly shattered the sacred vows they'd sworn before God and everyone they knew. He could almost respect it more if she'd been honest, if she'd just admitted the spark had died and she needed to explore new pastures. But the snide way she'd sneaked around with that smarmy, Ricardo Montalban-looking sleazeball behind his back? Nah, that shiz wasn't going to fly. For years, decades even, John had worked his meager fingers to the bone, trying to fashion a warm, modestly comfortable life for them to nest in. He'd forgone career promotions and higher salaries to keep Emily happy and by his side, turning down opportunities he knew deep down could have been their ticket to more. Yet it wasn't enough. She had to get restless, a spoiled brat seeking zipless gratification with the first swindler who oozed coin-operated charm her way. And for what? Some hole-in-the-wall wood-paneled apartment littered with expensive swill she couldn't appreciate. Well, if Emily wanted to be shallow, John resolved to match her pettiness by any means necessary. No, actually, he'd exceed and outlast it. He didn't care how long it took to implement his schemes. He was going to grind her humiliating infidelity into the dirt from which she'd risen. Vivienne had awoken something primal inside him, somebody who not only survived betrayal, but thrived on making the betrayers beg for forgiveness. Like Rambo or Jay Gatsby, or any iconic anti-hero who used their laser-focused quest for vengeance as a spiritual defibrillator, shocking them back to life when their heart had flatlined. John had died the night he got cucked, but by God, he'd be reborn a phoenix. This whole fiasco really boiled down to one thing: money. That slick bastard Richard had it oozing out of every overtanned pore on his leathery face. The kind of wealth that attracts ladies like Emily, the type who are blinded by shiny trinkets and fat wallets. To John's working-class eyes, Richard epitomized everything that was wrong with the upper crust: greedy, self-indulgent pricks who thought they could buy whatever or whomever caught their fancy, including, it seemed, his wife of nearly 2 decades. John had always figured that if he worked hard, put in the overtime, and socked away what he could into their modest savings, eventually they'd get ahead, build up a nice little nest egg to enjoy come retirement. But all his humble investments and sacrifices amounted to chump change compared to Richard's stratospheric net worth. The guy could probably wipe his ass with more money than John earned in a year running that rinky-dink grocery checkout line. No wonder Emily let her eyes and other assets wander when temptation came wrapped in Armani and reeking of petrodollars. That's what made stumbling across that dusty stamp collection such a game-changer. One day, John was just a lowly clerk counted out his paltry hourly wage. The next, he was a multi-millionaire with a potential golden ticket to get delicious payback. Vivienne really opened the door to how the other half lived: secret bank accounts, high-stakes art dealings, all the loopholes the upper crust used to hide their ill-gotten gains. John was a quick study, recognizing that with enough money he could not only settle the score, but maybe surpass Richard's grubby wealth in the process. It was like that old saying, the best revenge is living well, or in this case, living wealthy as hell. For the longest time, John was stuck in this pity-party funk after Emily did him so dirty. He'd come home from another soul-crushing day at the grocery grind, crack open a cold one, and just stew in the betrayal juices, replaying the discovery over and over, torturing himself with all the tiny red flags he'd missed or ignored about her shady behavior. How could he have been so blind and naive? The hurt and embarrassment burned deep, leaving him emotionally battered to the core. Friends tried to shake him out of his rut, but John just wasn't hearing it. Like a dog with a bone, he couldn't let go of the pain. That's what made his budding connection with Vivienne so unlikely, yet profound. Here was this classy, elegant woman from another stratosphere who somehow related to the anger and deception John had suffered. Instead of smug lectures or empty platitudes, she just got it on a primal level. For the first time in forever, John felt truly understood by someone who'd also been cheated and mistreated by life's cruel injustices. Vivienne was living proof that, yeah, the heartbreak sucked beyond words, but if you boldly dusted yourself off and got vengeful, a gnarly yet enlightening rebirth could be just around the corner. Under her conspiracy theorist, but make-it-fashion tutelage, John began rebuilding from the inside out. His brooding resentment calcified into an almost spiritual determination to, as Vivienne put it, repurpose that negative energy into positive manifestations of net worth. John immersed himself in learning the shady loopholes of offshore asset smuggling and high-culture power plays. With each covert transaction, each step closer to ruining the lives of those who'd ruined his, he further shed his former knave self and took on a steely, emboldened persona. The love-struck sap was gone. In his place, an ultra-focused mastermind fueled by retribution. And with Vivienne's elegant hand to guide him, John felt reborn with dark purpose. When John looked back at the sad sap he used to be, it was like peering into an alternate reality where some pathetic doppelganger existed. The old John, the faithful, plodding grocery clerk who lived to serve Emily's every whim, while she stepped out on him with Das Dutch bags behind his back. Paft, that schmuck might as well have been from another dimension. He was so unrecognizable now. All it took was one atomic cafeteria tray of betrayal smashed across his naive hopes and dreams to fully obliterate the devoted husband he once was. In his place stood a pole-axed, uncompromising force of calculated vengeance. A new John, part unhinged criminal mastermind, part flinty-eyed life coach, completely recalibrated his existence around systematically dismantling the lives of those who disgraced him. Vivienne's serpentine tutoring awakened a selfish, merciless spirit in John that he never knew he possessed. Suddenly, all the arcane tricks of high finance, offshore slush funds, payoffs, and power plays were child's play to absorb with her as his consigliere. His identity overhaul was so complete, so unrecognizable from the sad sack he was, it was almost exhilarating. That's probably what bonded him and Vivienne in ways that went beyond teacher-student or even friends. They both got perverse thrills from watching their vengeful machinations unfurl. With every asset stripped from Emily, every bid undercut on Richard's latest art acquisition, every penny Vivienne helped siphon into those untraceable Panamanian accounts, John felt deliciously vindicated. Like a hedonistic addict, he relished each salacious update on how thoroughly he'd torpedoed his betrayers. At the same time, Vivienne seemed to derive peeping Tom pleasure from John's own moral descent into the depths. Like a bespoke Bond villain, molding a new protégé to someday take over her empire. Whatever wrecking ball of unfinished business brought them together, there was no denying the sick, karmic companionship they found in one another. Of course, no revenge bender could last forever without some major blowback scorching those in its wake. By the time John and Vivienne's intricate web of payback schemes finally wound down, the devastation left in their path was biblical, to say the least. Emily and Richard's lives were straight-up craters, their finances blood dry, their reputations dragged through the mud, their entire sense of security and belonging nuked from orbit. Emily had to fire sale all her beloved knickknacks and luxury splurges to make rent. Richard's business ventures went bankrupt after John systematically outbid and undercut him at every turn in the art world. More than just material hardships, though, the psychological toll was overwhelming. Richard spiraled into full-blown alcoholism and mood disorders, unable to regain his former confidence and bravado. Emily became a haunted agoraphobic, rarely leaving their roach-trap apartment for fear of ridicule or legal ramblings. The once vibrant, chatty social butterflies were reduced to shells of their former selves. Broken pariahs shunned by their elite circles. Everywhere they turned were landmines of shame and PTSD from the utter ruination John had inflicted, which, to be honest, brought him a maniacal sense of catharsis at times. This is what they deserved, those worthless leeches. And yet, even with that savage awareness, there were moments John felt almost saddened by how diminished and pathetic his revenge targets became. Like, at what point does delivering justly cruel consequences veer into straight-up cruelty itself? Who's the truly depraved one? Them for wronging him or John for taking it to such depleting extremes? Questions like that would creep in over late-night whiskey shots with Vivienne, little micro-pangs of conscience making him second-guess the scorched earth path they'd carved. But his partner in crime always had a way of redirecting John's empathy with her patented tough love pragmatism. "Scars are just reminders we survived our wounds," she'd purr. Even as they savored their victory lap, John's metamorphosis was never totally complete.